All right, welcome everybody to the Lakers Legacy Podcast, where the offseason is nigh and big sweeping changes are expected across the league in what should be a pivotal landmark summer for the NBA. Now, the question is, are the Lakers going to partake in all of that action? We shall find out. So, bust out that Rubik's Cube and let's get to jigsawing. We've got to get Maxi Kleber some real help. I'm your host, Jonathan Hernandez, and I am joined by my co host, Tommy Alexander. And in today's episode, we are going to go through some hypothetical Lakers offseason scenarios using 3 or 4 open roster spots and try to badly predict the future. Tommy, are your butt cheeks clenched for what Rob has prepared for this summer?
Oh, yes.
Great. But it's not going to be Rob, Tommy. It's going to be me, what I have prepared for this summer. Okay, so let's get to this. I'm going to preface things by saying that let's just say the Lakers have about 3 or 4 new open roster spots to fill in free agency this summer, vacated by Shake Milton, Markieff Morris, and Alex Len, maybe Jackson Hayes and Jordan Goodwin. So I'll keep it contained and say we have 3 open roster spots to fill. I'm going to start off with boring realistic scenario number 1, where LeBron opts into his contract, his final year, doesn't take a pay cut. We don't make a trade this summer, and all we have are taxpayer MLE and vet minimums. DFS resigns or opts into his player option. Jordan Goodwin is kept, and the only guys who are leaving are Shake, Markieff, and Len. Are you ready for boring realistic scenario number 1?
Let's do it.
All right, for the taxpayer MLE, we are going to go with Jayshawn Tate. Spot number 1 filled. Veteran minimum vacated spot number 1. We're going to give it to DeAnthony Melton. Spot number 2 filled. Veteran minimum spot number 2, we're going to give to Jericho Sims. So those are our 3 moves this offseason, Tommy. Jayshawn Tate, DeAnthony Melton, Jericho Sims. How realistic do you think that scenario is, and would you be okay with that scenario?
So I don't know, right? The specific players we'll have to see. I think what you're describing, and this is like maybe not what Laker fans want to hear. I think that what you just described is close to what we will actually end up doing. I think it's going to be a fairly boring off season. I know that's like not what folks want to hear. I just like you look at what we have to improve. You look at Rob's sort of conservativeness and I won't even like bash Rob fully for all of this. I mean, it's partially his conservativeness and partially like we have to forget LeBron. I know we're trying to do the 2 timeline thing that we all hate, but we have to try to keep Luka long term, and Luka wants to stay here, and all indications seem to be that Luka wants to retire here. And we can't blow that, right? Like we don't want to like piss this guy off, and the by fielding year after year of terrible rosters when he made the conference finals and finals within 3 years with Dallas, right? Like in his first 6 seasons in the NBA. So like he has expectations and if we're I think folks get the point here, but I think it's going to resemble something like this. I would be fine with something like this. Jayshawn Tate is not a name. Using our big quote unquote big free agent signing on Jayshawn Tate is going to create so many memes that I'm not, you and I are not ready for the memes that are going to come out of this. You know what I mean? Just in terms of like, wow, this is really it. This is what you did. But he is a solid player. He plays super physical defense. He's at that like kind of big guard wing size that we need a body at. He's improved. I know he's been a little bit up and down over the course of his career, but he's shown signs as a shooter. And he can do things with the ball. I mean, you talk about these Bruce Brown sort of like approximations, and
bro, he is better than Bruce Brown. I'm telling you, he was the first Bruce Brown before Bruce Brown did stuff with the Nuggets. So yeah,
I mean, this is like the unfortunate thing because he's not consistently floating on poor teams where
sure.
he's not like being squeezed out on bad teams. He's being squeezed out because he's other talent, like in Houston, he's had lotto picks around him. He's had competitive teams around him, so he's gotten squeezed out a little bit. But it's just unfortunate because it's like every time his name comes up, because it has come up in the past, as a, oh, the Rockets might be interested in moving him, or oh, he might leave after his contract's up. It's never like the Lakers are interested, or like the Lakers name seems to like almost never come out in those, at least from what I can recall. And so that's unfortunate because these are the types of, I don't want to call it fringe because I don't think he's a fringe rotation player, but these are the types of signings of like lesser known guys that like lead you to like in 2 years you have Goga Batadze now making 20 million
Mhm.
less than what like other starting centers make, but he's like elite defense rebounding big, and like everyone else in that, like Isaiah Hartenstein is getting paid $30 million. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? So those are the types of signings you need to win, and it feels like we miss those. D'Anthony Melton, obviously, I'm a huge fan of his, and if we can get him for the minimum, it's a no-brainer. And we would have to sell him really well on the roll. And then Jericho Sims is somebody we targeted at the deadline. I think this is like a very, very realistic scenario, other than, if it's not Jayshawn Tate, somebody in that archetype,
Yeah.
who could, sort of sign there. And honestly, we would improve. Our team would
This
get
is a good
significantly
roster,
better. Yeah, yeah.
honestly. So I think I'm kind of preaching to the choir because this podcast we're like we like to go for the Moneyball hipster route, and this is like the Moneyball hipster like all stars right now. Lesser known guys. People are like, "Why are you capping for these randos?" And I'm like, because I've actually watched them when I've contextualized them properly, when they've gotten time, they've actually produced. It's all about opportunity and context. And so for me, I would be totally fine with this scenario. And I just actually like how bulky and huge Jericho Sims is. It's
Yeah.
almost like if Jackson Hayes had Trey Jameson's body. That's Jericho Sims. It's kind of insane. So yeah, you can. So let's move on because I think this is a very realistic scenario that I would be totally fine with. And let's start kind of jigsawing things. Boring realistic scenario number 2, Tommy. Taxpayer MLE, Gary Trent Jr., veteran minimum, Larry Nance Jr., veteran minimum number 3, let's just say Kai Jones, but you can add Jericho Sims in here again, Isaiah Jackson, James Wiseman, one of these super athletic, explosive flyer bigs to kind of replace Jackson Hayes if we don't resign him. So Gary Trent Jr., Larry Nance Jr., Kai Jones slash Jericho Sims slash reclamation big. What are your thoughts on that?
This feels more like something Rob would actually do. I think I like the first path a little bit better, but I think, because the age is important. I just think Jayshawn Tate versus Gary Trent Jr., you could make pros and cons. I realized that Gary Trent Jr. just dropped like 35 in a playoff game a few weeks ago, so like, that's relevant. That's potentially important factor. But he doesn't address the athleticism defects that we have as much as Tate does. So, yeah, I don't know. You could make arguments pro or con there. Larry Nance, we have a relationship with, obviously, and I'm sure, I know Larry Nance was like, they constantly talked about the fact that he was like universally loved when he was here. And so I think that would be like an easy one to bring him back, from a front office perspective. And then like a project big, that feels like, again, up Rob's alley. Like, I need two centers. Where am I gonna, one of them, if I can get a bargain bin guy who outperforms his contract, that's like a good way to try to fill two holes given the limited resources that we have. So I could see like a James Wiseman reclamation project feels like Rob Pelinka type of move.
Yeah, I would prefer Jericho Sims because he's proven it on competitive teams. And then I would probably go Isaiah Jackson if he's healthy off of his Achilles, because I really believe in Isaiah Jackson's athleticism and defensive potential. But yeah, insert Project Big here. I would be totally fine with this. It's with more established names. I love Larry Nance Jr., would love to have him back. I think even when we drafted him alongside Julius Randle, there were times when I sided with Larry Nance because I believed that he was a more championship ready professional. But yeah, I would be totally fine with this. Um, Boring realistic scenario number 3. We can kind of keep this short. Kind of in the same line as these other ones, but taxpayer MLE, Brooke Lopez or Luke Cornett, veteran minimum, Dante Exum, veteran minimum, Jericho Sims, Kai Jones, Isaiah Jackson. So essentially more of the same stuff. But what would your thoughts be on Brooke Lopez or Luke Cornett, Dante Exum, and another reclamation big?
Again, I like this scenario, especially if it's Luke Cornett over Lopez. And it like
Yeah.
Lopez feels like the guy that we're gonna go after this summer, or at least one of the guys in Rob's Rubik's Cube, scenarios. Like Irwin reported yesterday or recently, I can't remember when exactly, that the Lake. I mean, most of this is unremarkable, but the Lakers are targeting two bigs and they want them to have complementary skill sets. So they want a spacing big, they want a uh, vertical threat, lob threat big. I assume they want both of those guys to be good enough on defense. The thing about so Brooke Lopez, like if you end up making a, just because this has been the name floating around, if we do end up doing the Nick Claxton type of trade, it's probably going to be Rob going hard after Brooke Lopez. If we do a trade for like I don't even know what spacing fives are on the market, but if we end up getting, I hope it's not Vucevic, but if we end up getting like a Vucevic, maybe we go for like a more traditional lob threat type of big, or like a Cornet who's more of a defensive, close to the rim type of big, I guess is more what I'm thinking in that case. But I like Cornet. I think he's way better than people realize, except for maybe Celtics fans. And Exum we've talked about in other free agency pods, and I think if he can stay healthy, he's a pretty solid fit next to Luca. It seemed to work in Dallas in the minutes that he was able to, when he was able to play there off the bench, and yeah, I think obviously Project Big doesn't hurt. So good scenario. I think all three of these are good scenarios, and in some form, I think we're going to see something like this.
Yeah, the Cornett scenario might be the most boring I've ever seen, but actually pretty passable and serviceable. Luke Cornett, Dante Exum, former Pelinka client, and then Jericho Sims, Kai Jones, Isaiah Jackson bucket. I would be totally fine with that. And to your point, I do like having the complementary skills between bigs. And also Luke Cornett, well, Luke Cornett is he's like 29 years old. I forget that he's not that young anymore, but I would be totally okay with this scenario as well. All right, let's take it to break. When we return, let's get into let me add some trades into this so that you can kind of have a fuller spectrum of what we're looking at and maybe toss in a non-taxpayer MLE scenario as well. So we will catch you guys after the break. All right, so we are back. Tommy, let's go through let me throw out a marginal trade scenario with the taxpayer MLE. So we're still going to use the taxpayer MLE. We're going to add two vet minimums, but we're going to do a marginal trade scenario. The trade will be with the Orlando Magic. We're going to trade Dalton Connect, Shake Milton, Jordan Goodwin for Goga Batadze. We've talked about a deal like this before. So the trade is Goga Batadze. Taxpayer MLE after that is Gary Trent Jr. Veteran minimum after that is, let's say, Gary Payton II or Dante Exum to spice things up a little bit. The next veteran minimum is Jericho Sims, Kai Jones, Isaiah Jackson. So, what are your thoughts on Goga Batadze trade, Gary Trent Jr., Gary Payton II, Jericho Sims, insert reclamation big?
I think that those types of moves solidify a lot of issues for us. The one comment I have is, in the course of watching the Warriors, because they were obviously advanced farther than us, and Gary Payton got a ton of minutes because Steph Curry's was injured. Gary Payton, the second, is still a very good defender, but he has not had that like Alex Caruso development arc where
Hmm.
he like keeps getting like Alex Caruso was extreme. I mean, he started on a championship team. Like he was elite, right? He was really good for us that year, but he got better. I mean, he's better now than he was in 2020. All like way all like in every aspect of the game basically. And so Gary Payton II, my observation anyway, and from reading on like the Warrior subreddits and following sort of their Twitter, it sort of sounds the same. It feels like he just hasn't improved in that way. And if anything, his defense has dipped a little bit. So because he's such a offensive liability, your defense has to be like almost like, yeah, it has to be pretty elite. And I don't know that he's quite there, but something like this, I think would address a lot of issues that we have.
Yeah, and Gary Payton the second is never growing any taller than 6'2" or whatever
Right.
he is. Okay, marginal trade scenario with the taxpayer MLE number two. I'm interested in getting your thoughts. So at this point, we can kind of like we kind of know what the free agent C triple tier thing is going to be. So taxpayer MLE for this one is well, actually, I'll start with the trade first. We're going to trade for Matisse Thybulle. Okay, so this one's kind of tricky because I'm not sure where you would draw the line on what you would give up for a player on his expiring deal. I'm assuming that if we trade for Matisse Thybulle, it would be to re-up him. But let's say he takes his player option, $11 million. We're going to go to the Portland Trailblazers and we're going to trade. All right, brace yourself, dude. We're going to trade Dalton Connect and Maxi Kleber for Matisse Thybulle, $11 million expiring, and Chris Murray, former first round pick, albeit late. Chris Murray has a $3 million club option this year and then $5 million club option the next year. And then the Portland Trailblazers also give us 2 seconds. Are we giving up too much for Matisse Thybulle, or is it worth the risk? Dalton and Kleber for Matisse Thybulle, Chris Murray. So you kind of get a young player back who's like 6'8", and you get 2 seconds. And then taxpayer MLE Gary Trent Jr. to make up for Dalton's shooting loss. Vet minimum DeAnthony Melton. Vet minimum Jericho Sims. Reclamation big.
It's close. I think it's close. I think I lean on the side of not doing it, but I think a big part of all of this is I think the front office and the team certainly has a much better feel for what Dalton is and where they think he can go. I think Dalton is like this scary thing, right? Is like in the immediate aftermath. You just like think about the immediate aftermath of the trade. I mean, Matisse is going to be a solid player for us. He probably would start. But Dalton would go to Portland and average 20 a game. I mean, if Dalton was like starting on a significant six-man bench type of player on a team that's probably not going to make the playoffs, it would not surprise me if he jumped from whatever his number this was this year to like high teens, low, to maybe
Mm-hmm.
even all the way up to 20. He is a very, very, very gifted offensive player. He's older, he's more developed. He's going to be taking the leaps faster than other young players. And so it's like it's just going to be painful. And so I don't know if it's worth the pain. And like, do you just hold on to Dalton for a little longer? Because if he, like, at this point, it's not like he has lotto first round pick value. If he improves next season, he has high lotto pick, first round pick value. I don't think like 1/2 season of looking okay, but not amazing, maybe a slight improvement is going to like tank his value. So, maybe a long way of saying, I don't know that we need to, and I don't think we are rushing to trade him, but I certainly don't think we need to rush to trade Dalton because I don't think his value between now and February 2026 is going to, like, the downside cap on it is pretty high. But there is potential to get a lot more upside, depending on how he develops. So I'm wary about trading Dalton unless we're getting like a sort of game changing big of the like, healthy Mark Williams vein. Um, Something like that.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. I think maybe if Chris Murray was more like his brother Keegan Murray, you'd be like, yeah, let's do it. And then Matisse Thybulle is almost like the cherry on top of the sundae, which is kind of silly. But yeah, I understand. I would take I think okay, so I would do this for sure if Matisse Thybulle was on like a 2-year contract, where you have a little bit more cost controlledness on him before having to make a decision on what his next contract is. And plus he's coming off of an injured season, so it shouldn't take this much. So maybe this would have to be a 3-team deal where we get more assets back. Um, okay, let's talk about the Nick Claxton trade scenario, Tommy, with the taxpayer MLE. Let's go with like the first taxpayer MLE scenario that I threw out. Taxpayer MLE goes to Jay Sean Tate, veteran minimum DeAnthony Melton, veteran minimum Jericho Sims. And then we trade for Nick Claxton, Gabe, Maxi, Connect, and the 2031st first. That sounds insane to kind of give all of that up, but let's say we top 8 protect the 2031st first. We're not giving up a pick swap. It's insane that we gave up all of those things for Mark Williams and didn't have a protection on the first. So it's going to be Gabe, Maxi, Connect, top 8 protection on 2031st first. You've got Nick Claxton, Jayshawn Tate, DeAnthony Melton, and Jericho Sims. Let's go. We're winning the championship.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty impressive haul. The thing about Claxton, we've talked about this so much in so many iterations. It's just frustrating because his contract is just high enough to where it's like we have to include like a real, I mean, I know we all want to upgrade Gabe, but Gabe is a rotation player. Like, what's a rotation player for us
True.
all season?
We're
And
getting
like,
DeAnthony Melton
if we're
back,
getting
bro.
D'Anthony Melton, that's fine, and maybe that sort of quells the fears on that front. But yeah, it's the thing about Claxton is you have to give up an actual, whether you're including, I don't know that I don't think we would include Rui, but whether you're including Rui or Gabe, you're including a real rotation player. Plus, as a starting point, everyone who has a big knows that we offered Dalton and a first for Mark Williams. So even if even if like the big we're trying to get now is worse than Mark Williams, which Nick Claxton is not, but even if they were, that's what the other teams want, and so we've sort of put ourselves in a crappy situation there. But yeah, I mean, this would be a still notwithstanding everything I said, this would be a huge haul. I think we don't. Maxi is past his, unfortunately, past his prime. I think he had a really nice career and had some good moments, but he's past his prime. Gabe, we want to upgrade and would be upgrading with D'Anthony Melton. And, you know, Dalton and the pick is what we would have given up for a big anyway. And Nick Claxton on his cost control deal for many years. I mean, that's like very, has to be very, very attractive for us. So, yeah, I like this. If we could get all those guys and D'Anthony Melton stays healthy for a season, that sounds like a nice haul.
Yeah, we get tougher, we get more athletic. Nick Claxton and Jericho Sims are actually complementary bigs, believe it or not. Even though some people might say, "Oh, they just catch alley oops and stuff," but Nick Claxton weighs like 215, and Jericho
Yeah.
Sims is like 257. You know, he's a big boy, so I like kind of that combination, and they're both young. So I would absolutely love this scenario if we're able to get all of these players. Before we go, though, I want to throw out a non taxpayer MLE scenario just because we should cover that and do our due diligence. Let's say LeBron James does take a $13 million pay cut. Here is a non taxpayer MLE no trade scenario. All right, this is President Jonathan here, jumping into the slightly pre recorded past to caveat the following scenario by saying, we recorded this right before Steven Adams signed a new extension with the Houston Rockets. So, spoiler alert, Steven Adams is going to be part of this next scenario. But I'm going to keep this part in this episode anyway for purposes of further discussion and because there are other prospects that I think are pretty interesting to talk about. But yeah, with that said, since Adams is no longer available, just replace his name with Clint Capella instead, even though I don't think Capella will command as much as I say Steven Adams will command in this next part. But yeah, with that caveat added, let's continue on with the discussion. What would your thoughts be about giving the full non-taxpayer MLE to a big like Steven Adams? And then veteran minimum, let's say we can get, let me throw out a new name. Let's say we can get KJ Martin. He opts out, or no, the Utah Jazz don't guarantee his deal. He becomes an unrestricted free agent. So we've got Steven Adams, KJ Martin, and then veteran minimum, I'm just going to keep saying Jericho Sims. So your thoughts on Steven Adams, KJ Martin, Jericho Sims, and whether you would actually give all of that to Steven Adams if he were willing to take it?
So the problem is, I don't think Steven Adams can be, and maybe I'm wrong about this, and Houston was just containing him, or you know, they have Şengün and whatever. I don't know that Steven Adams can be a starter. And if you're paying all that money to, again, it's like if that's your one of your three chips to use in the offseason and you're using it on a backup center, I don't know that that really makes sense. I mean, Steven Adams looked phenomenal in the playoffs this year, and he's going to get paid by someone because he can clearly still play. He obviously has a whole career to support that. So I like Steven Adams. I just don't know, like, you know, he's a like defense, rebounding, screen setting. He is like what anybody should want as a bench big, you know, with the caveat that he can give you real minutes when you need it situationally. I just don't know over 82 games if you can lean on him as your starter. You know, with the type of ball we want to play, especially like, you know, with Luca wanting a lob threat.
Yeah, hopefully, like in this scenario, Jericho Sims kind of eats up a lot of that as well. But to your point, I don't know if you want to give like the full $14 million to Steven Adams. Maybe if he was like 27 years old, but this is,
Right.
I think, 32 years old. Steven Adams coming into next season. Okay, LeBron takes an even bigger pay cut, Tommy, 15
Ho
to 18
ho.
million dollar pay cut. And so now not only do we have the non-taxpayer MLE, but we have the BAE to use as well. What if we
Okay.
gave the non-taxpayer MLE to Nickeil Alexander-Walker? He takes the full one, $14 million. We give the BAE to Luke Cornett, and then we sign Jericho Sims to the veteran minimum. So Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Luke Cornett, Jericho Sims. Your thoughts on that?
I mean, I love it, and especially because you don't have to you don't have to get do any trades to make that work. So we keep all of our important assets. I think, Nickeil Alexander-Walker has struggled as, a perimeter shooter in the playoffs this year, but he had an entire season of fairly high volume where he did very well. I mean, he's played very good defense. He's still young and developing. He's got good length. It does seem like a good fit next to Luca in the backcourt. And so if we could get him for that price point, notwithstanding his sort of hot and cold performances in the postseason so far, I think I would go for that. And I do think Luke Cornett, I mean, he has I think Luke Cornett could be a starter if he is backed up by a solid player. And I think Jericho Sims or somebody in that list of sort of like reclamation bigs that we might be able to get for a minimum. I think you could use to complement Cornett, and that would be good enough. And then you go into the season like still with all your assets and still able to potentially make a future trade if you need an upgrade at 5 later.
Yeah, I agree. By the way, I just want to say I'm not sure what Jericho Sims will command. I keep saying he's a veteran minimum, but who knows? He may actually command a little bit more than that because he may want to pick the right situation for him. So just keep that in mind. Okay, let me give you one non-taxpayer MLE trade scenario. LeBron takes the pay cut, opens up the non-taxpayer MLE. We do the Orlando Magic trade for Goga Batadze. Dalton, Shake, Goodwin go out. We have Goga Batadze. We have the non-taxpayer MLE, Tommy. So we sign Nickeil Alexander-Walker. And then for the veteran minimum, just to give you a new name, Tim Hardaway Jr. decides to sign with us for the veteran minimum. I don't think he will because Detroit probably just resigns him, but Tim Hardaway Jr. to replace Dalton Shooting, and he's also Luka's former teammate. And then veteran minimum, let's just say Kai Jones. So Goga Batadze, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Tim Hardaway Jr., and Kai Jones.
I like where you're going. I think that it falls apart to your point with the Tim Hardaway Jr. contract because he's probably going to get a little bit less than what he's current or what he got on his last deal, but I don't think it's going to go all the way down to the veteran minimum. But,
Yeah.
if for some reason he feels
Well, what if
like
he becomes like this year's Gary Trent Jr.? Because it happened to Gary Trent, right?
exactly.
So
Yeah, so if he gets squeezed out, the Pistons throw all their funds at somebody else. I mean, the Pistons, right, they just made a pretty good run and their needs are very transparent. So let's say they just go all in on some free agent signing and Tim Hardaway, like that's long, they give this guy a long-term contract and then Tim Hardaway Jr. sort of gets squeezed out. Very possible. And then, when you're looking around the teams juggling their books, I don't know that more of an offensive minded two guard like fits for a lot of teams like around the full MLE range. So yeah, you could end up in a scenario where Tim Hardaway Jr. is stuck between like some BAE lower MLE options or playing
mhm.
next to Luca, who he's familiar with for the veteran minimum on like a 1 year prove it deal. I could see him potentially taking that actually now that we're talking it through. But yeah, I don't. I think it's interesting, and I think that you need to sort of consolidate these and send them to Rob Pelinka because I don't know that his Rubik's cube is has this many angles on it.
So yeah, Tim Hardaway Jr. 11 points, 37% from three, knocking down 2.2 a game with the Detroit Pistons. He would be an interesting if he gets pinched out veteran. And you segued us perfectly to the very last thing that I want to throw at you, Tommy, and that is the most Pelinka-iest scenario. Are you ready for this?
Mm-hmm.
This is for shits and giggles. So we have the non-taxpayer MLE. We're going to split it in half, $7 million, $7 million, and this is what Rob Pelinka is going to do with it. For the first $7 million, he's going to give it to Brooke Lopez. Second $7 million, he's going to give to Gary Trent Jr. For the veteran minimum, he's going to give it to Ben Simmons, and the second veteran minimum is he's going to give it to either Chris Paul or Malcolm Brogdon. What are your thoughts on that? And is that the most Pelinka-iest scenario that you've ever seen?
It's very Plinky. Um, but I mean, yeah, it seems possible. I mean, these guys are. It's interesting. This now that we've gone through all these names, you've obviously thought about this a lot more than I have. But it's interesting going through all the names because it feels like, and a lot of the media has reported that, oh, this is like going to be an uneventful free agency. But I think it's uneventful if you're only looking at big names. I think
Mm-hmm.
there are so many of these sort of fringe contract type of guys that we might be able to, uh, or fringe, what many would consider to be like fringe rotation type players that if you can get them on value deals could end up making a difference next season. And so yeah, I mean, I'm hoping Rob is exploring all that.
Well, I think it's going to be uneventful, right? But because it's going to be uneventful for the most part, because there are no big name free agents and teams will be spending most of their time trying to concoct trades, I think that means it's going to pinch out a lot more players than expected. So I think we might end up getting more Gary Trent scenarios. And the teams that benefit are going to be the teams with opportunity who only have veteran minimum exceptions to dole out, you know? And so at that point, it's up to the player to be like, well, do I want to play with Luca? Is this the best situation for me? Am I going to be promised a role of some sort, et cetera, et cetera? And so I think that's where Rob needs to take advantage, really moneyball things, because as I've sort of illustrated here, I mean, I don't think any of these are out of the realm of possibility, right? It's just Rob kind of has to be smart about who he prioritizes, who he attacks, and who he's contacting behind the scenes to see who's available and who's willing to take a 1 year prove it deal for the right role. So we'll see, but you're slightly more encouraged, right? After this.
I am a little more encouraged. I would be more encouraged if our front office was more than just one guy named Rob Pelinka.
All right. With that said, that'll do it for this episode. Thank you guys for watching. Follow us on Twitter/X at Lakers Legacy Pod. Please also subscribe to our YouTube channel of the same name. And yeah, Tommy, I will catch you later after Rob has successfully enacted one of these scenarios. Hopefully not the last one, the Pelinka-iest scenario. But yeah, I will catch you later.
Peace.
See ya.